So I had to change the water pump on a 2010 Toyota Camry with something like 75,000 miles on it, and we did the alternator as well. I'm not sure if the water pump failure caused the alternator failure, but so basically to get to the water pump, which is down here on this side of the tensioner, kind of underneath this alternator, you have to take off the alternator, which is this bolt here, and there's another bolt down there. 2 bolts. You got to take off the power line, make sure you disconnect the battery. You got to disconnect this electrical harness beneath here. This bracket right here has to come off. And you can slide this off and get this whole harness kind of pushed out of your way. And then use a crowbar right in here to break the thing loose. It's not just a little gentle pressure, will pop it right out, and you can pull this alternator right out of there. Then once you're out, you got the water pump exposed. And of course, I left out the part where you got to pull on this tensioner to get the belt off. Basically, you just put a 14mm wrench on this and pull it towards you, pull it towards the front of the car. That'll release the tension off the belt so you can slide the belt off the alternator. You get the belt out of your way. The belt goes on the water pump pulley below there. And the water pump has a bunch of bolts that you're going to be able to get to a lot better once you have the alternator out of the way. Some of the bolts for the water pump are hard to get to. This one right here by the tensioner, it actually does help a lot to pull the tensioner, and the one that's right below it as well. You want to pull the tensioner forward a little bit so you can get access to that bolt a little better. And the one there's one bolt below the pulley for the water pump that's kind of hard to get to, but I was able to get at it with just a regular socket wrench. You reach in with one hand to guide it and use the other hand to stabilize it, and you'll get it onto that bolt. It's 12mm. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that these 12mm bolts for the water pump are, I think, 80 inch-pounds, which is like 6 foot-pounds. So you really don't want to over-tighten those. Just snug them up and give them a little eighth of a turn on top of that. It's really hard to get a torque wrench in there. Here's an example of the old water pump. This is by ASIN. It's OEM Toyota, and you have a huge amount of play in this bearing, which was allowing coolant to get through, and there was no lubrication for this bearing, so it sounded really loud. When the car was running, it made a scraping sound. I think that we got this for we got an ASIN replacement for like 60 bucks on eBay. This alternator was $350, or actually $300 after the core. Sorry, Mike. And so that was kind of big bucks, but I'm sure we could have got it cheaper if we went on eBay. But this one's got a warranty from, I think, AutoZone. So
AutoZone lifetime.
Yep. So basically, get those bolts out. This particular water pump has a metal gasket. Let's see if I can show that. This is the gasket that came off. Some of this is just, that black there is paint. That's not a gasket sealer. It's just a metal, black metal gasket. So there's no RTV sealant on this particular setup. Although I'm sure some people will use it. And that's about it. Get those bolts out. That's the major part of the challenge, and then getting them back in, snugging them up. I think you're supposed to snug them up in a certain pattern, crisscross pattern. And then when you come back to tighten up your alternator bolts, I put these to 35 foot-pounds. It was pretty hard to find the torque specs for the top and bottom bolt are the same diameter. They're, I believe, a 14mm, and I think it's like an M10. So I put them at 35 foot-pounds. Other than that, that's pretty much the job. We took the radiator cap off, and it drank almost a gallon of fluid. Like, we didn't even drain the coolant. We just took this water pump off and let that coolant drip down into the pan and dumped about a gallon into the radiator, and that pretty much seemed to shore it up. So we're going to start this up in a minute and see if we got any leaks. Turn on your heater, run the car, let that coolant cycle through, and check for leaks around the water pump.